There we go.
Yeah, I really liked what you wrote, about the vulnerability and flex flow and, the pulse and bringing awareness, because those words that you used have a certain incarnational feel to me. Pulse, fluid, and vulnerability, especially. But ever since my trauma in 2000, a lot of my major work was of determining that there's strength and vulnerability, but there are different kinds of vulnerability, in the sense that I had to learn who I could be vulnerable with.
Right.
Some people, the reason they have a hard time with my vulnerability is because it triggers their own vulnerability. It's a trigger for them. And you run into people actually, it's not about you, it's about how they're dealing with their own similar experience that you're trying to work with. Point in case, about 6 months after I had my tractor accident, a friend that I've known, and he's still a friend, but we haven't talked in a long time. I grew up with him, and I was having one of my moments and working with it about the trauma and stuff, and he just barfed out, from my point of view, "Mike, you're alive. Well, just get over it." And from my memory, I just took note. I said, "Okay, Barry. Yeah, okay. I'll talk to you later." And basically, we haven't talked since, because I knew I couldn't feel safe. Now, don't get me wrong, I think that sometimes that can, if it's timed well, can serve a purpose, but it wasn't, I wasn't in that place.
Right. He's a friend. He's not some sort of life coach in that moment.
Yeah, yeah. So, but I was walking around before I got on here. One of the things that came up that I feel that there's a subtle feeling tone when we're working about this word awareness is, I think the tension is we want to be perfectly aware, in the sense of an ego trying to protect itself rather than just simply being held in awareness. Does that make sense?
Right. That's what I've been perceiving in a lot of the sister kind of projects that are going on. Quantum field poetics is not about perfecting what's out there. It's about noticing there's a few patterns here and there, and that we can proceed in various directions. We've got diffraction, we've got diffusion, whatever term you'd like to use, it's there. But that's one area where there's a container, but it's impossible to just put a complete boundary on it. So you have to proceed with some sort of caution.
And it's a skill set and a discipline. The caution, and I'm speaking out of my trauma experience, the caution is there to protect you to a certain extent, but the underlying discipline is, at the same time of being caution, of it's okay to be open, and not let the caution turn into kind of an ego contraction, where you solidify the boundaries rather than, and this is a metaphor, you can have a fence, a wall, or whatever, but the skill is what is the makeup of the boundary? Is it a chain link fence? Is it a wooden fence? Is it, what is it made of? And that's a lot of what I've worked with, is looking at what is my boundaries made of, as much as setting the boundaries. But I think that comes out of my work as being a maintenance person, where I had to repair wire fences and I had to repair different types of boundaries.
Well, I liked one of the metaphors you used yesterday. I think you were referencing near the end how that particular conversation would be a certain sort of hub, and we're all going to go out, do our weekly exploring. But we're not going too far. Not that the home here is the safest place or anything like that, but it's a container for us to spill out some sort of vulnerability. That's, for me, I phrased it. I embarrass myself, but really I open myself up to the vulnerabilities.
Oh, okay.
There's,
Okay.
there's that core meeting place, whether it's yourself, you can imagine, and you said the tendrils will go out and then come
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. Nice.
So
Nice.
there's not necessarily a barrier. So
Mhm.
it's at least that's how I'm perceiving it. If I don't know how to separate it from the current perception or something like that, but
Yeah. Well, one of the things in working with Tibetan Buddhism and different meditations, and John actually talks about this, that I think it's an underdeveloped sense, is you can have a hub, but does there have to be the center can be filled with space and still work? You know, in other
mhm,
words, instead of feeling, I think that's what the ego does. It solidifies the center of ourselves, trying to protect it, you know, protect our life force. But what the ego needs to learn is to relax that, uh, let space or let it breathe. You can still have the fence around the protecting yourself, but if you are densifying, building walls, the ego tends to contract to the point that it's actually imprisoning our life force.
right.
You know, this just comes out of my own body somatics that I've been working with.
Hmm. There's a lot to digest here.
Yeah, okay. I think it sounds like it goes along with Arabendo. It
And
sounds
that
like it goes. It kind of, you know, it's following his thread. Probably don't articulate it as well as he does.
well, what I gathered, and I'm still questioning with, well, I think it's such a simple kind of triune.
Mm,
There's dark, there's the move involution, or just simply the movement from,
okay.
if you want to call it nothingness or darkness. But I like to imagine the yin yang, which
Yeah. Me too.
um,
Me too.
there's darkness, and then we're trickling into some sort of cycle or flow of just creation, transformation from the, he uses terms like ignorance into knowledge.
Hmm.
Um, but I see it as just there's dark and light, and then there's kind of the dark going into the light and the light going into the dark.
Yeah, and
And
do you perceive that liminal space of where they're kind of mixed? They're
right,
kind of
and that's
mixed together.
where I imagine the two dots
Uh-huh.
as being some sort of, I think Johnny uses the Klein bottle, but as some sort of path that's
Yeah.
not that's never complete. It's not
Yeah.
ever finished. It's just a continual some sort of loop or cycle.
Yeah, and see, I language it that it's a matter of reverse ratios. The darkness will have a speck of light, and the light will have a speck of darkness in it. The opposite uh, includes its own opposite, you know, sort of thing. Like the yin yang shows that they're smaller dots, and I understand the image of that, but for me, not denying that little speck of the other in myself,
Right,
whether
and
it's light or
that's
dark.
if we're going back to Aurobindo's writing, is
Oh, okay.
you can go on for 20 pages and he's focusing on like the infinite void or something like that of
Uh-huh.
one little tiny speck within the darkness. So he's
Ah,
not, but so he's examining
ah,
each point along the way. So it's easy to kind of get lost or
okay.
misperceive what's being said there. Um, but essentially, it maps on to our. I perceive our waking. I think it's the 6 yogas of Naropa, which
Oh,
I'm
okay.
on 4 recently. Just the
Uh-huh.
waking state, kind of dreaming state, the deep dreamless state, and then
Okay.
into something else. But
Okay.
that's been where
Yeah.
I map
It's
on all that
it's
together.
it's interesting to, for me at least, to be sensitive, having developed how these ideas are just out there, and everybody has kind of grabbed them like Arabando. This is my take. Grabbed them like a tennis ball and go, oh, what do I do with this? you know, and I love listening to different voices of how they perceive, that organization of some idea.
And that's the first metaphor that Sloterdijk uses in the globes trail. He's
Oh, it
talking
is.
the
Yeah.
golden orb that's kind of been passed down
Oh, okay. Okay.
uh, generations. So that was my first introduction to, you can basically just bend it, your own metaphor at will.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
case was another
Yeah.
500, 1,000 pages of
So,
kind of making up his own idea of time, or like space and being, essentially.
yeah.
Uh,
So, do I have this right? I mean, you're new to infinite conversation, or
it's it's been about 1 year now. I think it was some time in November when I first started
Mhm.
checking out the site.
Well, it seems that you've done your own reading along the lines that that cause some kind of resonance with the infinite conversation.
Right. And it just goes along with any thought that I'm having, or any reading
Mhm.
always reflects what I've accumulated. So essentially what being on this infinite conversations does is, in a way, it's a container for all this crazy stuff that I would normally just kind of, it would shoot out one ear out the other, or one brain cell out the other, because I don't have anybody to talk to it about, or
It doesn't ping in your skull, ping back in your skull.
but just like when I was reading John Durham Peters, I recognize that Sloterdijk is there throughout, but he doesn't. He
Uh,
has Peters has a unique take. The
mhm,
media focus
mhm.
wasn't so much there in Sloterdijk. That he has more of
Yeah.
the
Um,
being.
so I guess what I'm asking too, so these authors that we're talking about are new to you. What authors were you reading before you came to the site?
And that's a good question. I frequent the library a lot for my job. I
Uh-huh.
travel, so I often need to go to a library to use my laptop for the job, because I'm not
Okay.
offered an office in different counties.
Oh, nice.
So I'll hang out at the library for hours at a time, and that's when. But previously, I was reading, maybe just checking up the latest nonfiction, kind of like you do with maybe The Strange Order of Things. You might
Hmm.
have just picked that up at the library or something. I don't know
Yeah.
what you.
It's another
Books
book.
like that, I tend
Yeah.
to
One
check out
author,
a bit
one
when
author,
something appeals to
one
me.
author refers to another author. I kind of just follow authors' references sometimes. I like to understand how they've been influenced by other authors.
But yeah, I didn't have any in-depth thought going on. It was more just kind of going. It
No, no,
seems very
that's
similar
great.
to your path. I would just go from one book to the next, and
Yeah,
um, eventually form some sort of idea and stick with that.
yeah,
But it's always
yeah.
been a
I
mission.
consider myself a kind of a a rancher that cobbles together whatever comes. I use whatever's at my close at hand, cobble together whatever, fallen
One,
tree or
two.
whatever, you know.
I like that.
you know and that to me also, remember I brought up that I read uh Gregory Betson's Mind and Nature, like where he was promoting the ecology of mind. I read it back in the 70s, and I actually read it out of being depressed. I just, part of the way I dealt with my depression is I'd read a lot. But and and what I've come to find out is the ideas did get in there, but they're now coming growing a little bit more,
Mhm.
you know. So that's why I like Johnny's phraseology of ecologies, because I've always had an intuition that the mind and nature is not, that's just a functional separation so we can interact. It's not a reality, a solid reality that we're separate.
Right. And just simply talking about it, many others have noted. We noted that yesterday too in our talk, that
Yeah.
just simply acknowledging that it exists, that it makes it a more frequent occurrence. To
Yeah.
step out the door and a leaf shakes in the right direction or something like that.
Did you see what Mark posted about me on
The
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 Tarzan and the ape?
yes.
And then my response was the ape in the suit.
You're the noble beast. You're the
Yeah,
noble.
the noble beast.
I like that. Hmm.
And it might be inferred that the ape learned from Tarzan, or they learned from each other. But they had to fight it out. They had to, as one person says about evolution, it's messy and not. It's beautiful, but it's messy. And sometimes the only way we move forward is we have to fight in a certain sense. We have to fight to get to the next level. But it should be a loving fight.
Right. Well, I hope. I noticed John is just slightly on the late side. I hope we didn't scare him away with my harsh comments. No, I'm just kidding. He
Well,
comes on
yeah.
soon. I know he wanted to talk about a bit, but I'd like for him to hear what we're talking about so we can feed off of each other.
Yeah. Well, and I like that happening. Is that John?
There
Yes,
we go.
it is John.
That's how you do it. You
There
speak
he
his
is.
peers.
Fashionably late, John.
Apologize. My apologies.
Oh, that's all right. I'm just giving you a hard time.
I got stuck in traffic, so I'm
You
here.
have traffic in New York?
Oh, it was terrible. I was on the Upper West Side,
Yeah,
trying to get as fast as I could.
yeah.
And I lost track of time, actually. I got so absorbed. I was at the gym, so here I am.
Oh, getting your workout. Getting your workout.
How is everybody?
So far, so good. John, Doug and I have been rapping about this and that. Yesterday's conversation and how that went.
Oh, okay. Don't let me interrupt. Keep going. I'll catch up. I'll catch my breath. I just ran up 5 flights of stairs.
Oh, wow.
Is it pretty brisk there outside?
It's it is brisk.
Great.
It is. It's nice. I love this weather. It's
Mhm.
beautiful.
Nice.
Yeah, I think both of us took. Michael said you took a short walk before jumping on here, and I made sure to park at a distance so I could get a nice lengthy walk throughout the town.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I've been walking all this morning to the coffee shop and back home. So, but
Very good.
it's not brisk here. It's just slightly nippy.
Mhm.
So, shall we begin with how would you guys like to begin? With an open frame, or have you had an open frame already?
Yeah, we basically have had an open frame.
We
Yeah,
talked about yesterday's event.
yeah, and Mark posting Tarzan and the gorilla about my comment, and I don't know if you've seen, I posted the gorilla in the suit.
I did see that. And there was a little flurry of activity this morning. I was able to post a few things, and I
Yeah,
was responding to Doug's post.
yeah,
Because you posted something on Gidley.
yeah, yeah. I
Right.
actually,
We haven't fully discussed any of that. We've shared a few metaphors that bridged out of the dung discussion yesterday to show that the shit is
Yeah.
coming together.
metaphors are growing out of the dung.
Oh, yeah.
So we're all over the place.
Well, I was curious about Gidley's futurist kind of vision, and I think that was mentioned yesterday, and you've mentioned it before, Doug, going into post-formal education. And then didn't get a chance to look closely at the model, but I had a few questions for you. And this is just an example, I think, of, holding the tension. I think the way I framed it was, I think it was, what was that tension between? It was about the
Depth
group.
and span. Depth
and span. Yeah, that comes out of something Wilbur used to talk about
Yeah,
a lot.
he used that quite a bit as far as I think my reading of him in terms of how we're going to hold perspectives. Perspectives can have a depth and they can have a span.
That's right. That's right. And groups as well
Yes.
have a span. There's some people who like to keep it light,
Yeah.
and there are like some people who like to go too deep, too fast.
I'm guilty of that.
So it's about finding, I think, the right amount of the balance,
Right.
because people won't go deep if they
Yeah.
don't feel safe. They'll stay superficial levels, which I think is or if they go too deep too fast, then they get very unstable.
Oh no, that's what I've had to modulate. And learning how to recalibrate that, like, not going deep too fast though, and holding that tension. I also feel what I've learned is that people's responses to that tension dictates whether they're going to do anything in
That's
terms of I've trained myself to hold the tension. Some people just feel it and react off of it.
Yeah, some people feel it and they leave.
Yes, no, and that's a reaction. Yeah.
They look for the exit.
Yeah.
So
right.
that's the tension that
Yeah.
I feel if there were enough practitioners who were competent enough, who make a commitment, then I believe you can expand, and you can you can invite more people on, because there's enough stability in the system that can manage the perturbations of new people.
Well, that's why it's
Who may be full of shit.
Yeah, right. Well, that full of shit begins in our bodies, and that's why one of the things I think art specifically, but I'm going to go specifically in terms of any kind of physical training, you're working with attention, whether you're wrestling or whether you're a team sport. There's, how do I put this? I've come to realize how much conversation has a physicality.
That's
and it's from because I'm a kinetic person and I have to do, I enjoy that. And once I got how conversation has a physicality and not keep it abstract, it gave me a better working compass and center of gravity.
That's right. That's right.
Did that make sense?
It does. And Doug, I've had a chance to chime in. What about you? I think you are
wanted to say that
an alternative framework. So
yeah, right.
but it's what we've been doing essentially, and we've done the past 15 minutes. What we've done the past 3 conversations now is do what we're doing now. We're getting a feel for each other. We know each other well enough that we're not like questioning what's his next move. It's more of like where are we going with this? What do we want to have happen? So we're at that, like, I'm laid back here, I'm relaxed. I'm not trying to find information on the internet. I'm not seeking out much. I know that we will find the right direction to go, and we'll be listening well. With that said, what I mean by maybe the complexity or bringing in more people, it doesn't even have to be physical people here, although that would be nice. Katina mentioned she might come by. It's open invitation, and we're still just the 3 of us, clearly. Nobody else is ready.
Yeah.
Whatever to offer, but I'm more interested in bringing in like somebody like Gidley. I was talking with Michael just a minute ago about being a part of this ongoing conversation here for a little less than a year, and I'm piecing together somebody like Sloterdijk with John Durham Peters, who takes kind of the media side of space in a few of the chapters there. He goes into towers and walls at one point. Not as in-depth as Sloterdijk, which is very relieving, but it's good to, well, I learned this from this fella here, and this person has a great perspective, and it's taking in, I've looked closely and read most of the post-formal education book, but it's pretty easy, or it's divided up pretty simply to where it explains the 12 paths, what is within that circle there. I don't want to explain it here. I want to maybe focus on that at another time when maybe more of us have had a chance to look at it. But essentially it's love, life, wisdom, and voice. And I see that as also a reflection of just on the simplest level, black and white, and then some sort of transformation in between all that. Michael and I use the yin yang, and seeing that as somewhat three-dimensional, or maybe it's a two-dimensional Klein bottle, if you want to see it that way. And the black's tube leads into the white, and vice versa. So each one has certain aspects of each. But that's, and we mentioned how Aro Bendo also has that flow. It's a triune flow, but it's also has in and out. So it becomes 4 at times, or whatever you want to throw in there. But that's kind of where we were at with our metaphors before you jumped on.
I just can't resist the yin yang symbol. Is there a relationship between yin yang symbol and the Mobius strip?
Mm-hmm.
But that's for another day, perhaps. Is there a relationship between the Mobius strip and the torus? Is there a relationship between the torus and the Klein bottle? I think that's when we're going from second to third to fourth to fifth dimensions.
And I also noted, which I'm very much focused on, is that same cycle being mapping onto our waking, dreaming, even the waking transitioning into a dreaming state, or the dreaming transitioning back into waking. So all the various points map as well onto the same little symbol there.
And could you be bringing in I can't remember her name, is that Carrie Welch, who does the brain rhythms, and she maps that onto Gebser's archaic, she's talking about alpha, theta, delta.
And yeah, that plays a role too. I haven't quite fully figured out, or I'm not figuring anything out. I'm just letting it all kind of seep in.
Well, I think we're just bringing our attention to all these models,
right?
You know, and how, my question is, there's embodiment, embedded, and there's another E, and I can't remember what it is. But there's something about modeling which necessarily takes in a lot of information from many different perspectives and streamlines the information.
Yeah.
A certain product, which is great, but you just don't have one model if you want to have a good day or a good month or a good year. You need more models, but they all have to somehow find a fit with one another, so you can, oh, this model works for this and this model works for that. And that model doesn't work anymore, although it worked at one time. And I think that's our challenge. It's not good models. We got plenty of them. It's what do we do with all of them? And that's what I think the skill of meta modeling comes into play, which I believe clean language for me is the most effective way of working with meta models.
Right.
And that's why I wanted to get up to speed, you know, the skill level. And I think 2 or 3 people get a little more skillful with that, then I believe we could move into all of these different landscapes on this side and other places where we're working. And we would be much more efficient.
Yes.
I know that's a very unromantic word, but efficiency sometimes really is very useful.
Yes, it is. I don't know if this is the other E, but from my understanding, we're embodied, but we're also embedded in an environment. We have an embeddedness, and our embodiment and our metaphors are going to come naturally from our environment. You read cross-section geographically how the metaphors for China, Middle East, that's one thing in that book, Clouds, he points out, I feel, is depending, like the Tibetans are high in the mountains. Space is very important to them.
Right.
Or if you live in the water, he tries to, how different is dolphins who live in a medium? We have a tendency as human beings, this is what's interesting, I think, that points to what you're saying, John, is we've developed the capacity to work in water, land, air, space. But our bodies, if I understand this right, as a medium, has to adjust to each medium of that element of space, air, and water. Or
and
land.
There's also like a desert.
Yeah, desert.
Desert cultures, island cultures, mountain cultures.
Yes.
As you're saying, these are all very different ways of making sense. Has to do with the geography. And now that we're moving from geography to geography, we're bringing with us all kinds of bacteria and viruses, and little seeds that get on our clothes, little parasites that go into a new environment and can find a niche there, become predatory, and wipe out, generations of species that had been there before. So these are the kinds of environmental potential challenges or even disasters that we're going to have.
I was also pointing to your skill set that based on working with these different models from these different geographies and cultures, the meta skill set of to be able to be agile, to move within these, because I take your skill as an agility, being agile with different metaphors, and sometimes I'm not, because they're too new, maybe, and one last thing, and so that, to move on, I thought of this today. I consider you two my allies in the dreaming process, like Castaneda talks about having allies.
That's right. Consolidate allies, I think, is that's a motivating force for me. I think the more we learn about our systems, we observe that when people are making breakthroughs, they're going to a higher level of functioning.
Mm-hmm.
They need allies to support that. If they don't get the allies, they tend to go back to where they were, even before they got to the stage. They can regress several levels down without support for that new. And that's why I think we have a challenge, because some of us are making breakthroughs, but if there's no one around to support that, it'll evaporate very quickly.
Well, and that's the tension for me, and I think it's language the same way, of the Americans' hyper-individualism that doesn't want to allow for the social or the allies. That tension, a lot of Americans have trouble with.
I do. I know I do. And that's one of the tensions around public and private.
Right. Yeah.
We tend, I think in America, the economy is set up so that we privatize gain and we make the pain public.
I like that. I like that.
But it's not created by a few. It's created by everybody.
Yeah.
But only a few are getting the gains. And
not the pain.
That's right. So I believe a redistribution is going to be necessary, not just for our fulfillment or our well-being, but our relationship with planet Earth is pretty fragile.
Oh, yeah.
And this whole idea that we can keep extracting resources, the whole idea of that there's a limitation, is very un-American.
Yeah, it is.
And so I believe we have to find new ways of getting satisfaction, and I believe we can. If
so
we could.
What do you mean by redistribution? That's
well,
quite a bit.
I mean, they're making a big deal about raising minimum wage to like $15 an hour. Mm-hmm. Who can live well on $15 an hour? Really, that is like such peanuts compared to what the top 1% have. And so when you have 40 corporations that are who have more resources than any nation state, we see there's great inequities in the system that are not sustainable. It's just not, the economy itself requires dynamism. And when you have a few people who have most of the resources and are holding on to those resources, there's not enough flow.
Yeah, and they have the power to dictate how the system is going to work.
Which they can't control. Mother Nature is much more complex than they ever will.
That's true.
And they're using models that are antiquated already. So anyway, this is the big picture, and I'm really interested in. Well, I've already told you guys what I'm interested in. I'm just wanting to sort of chunk it down, chunk it slow.
Good. Let's do it.
Find the chains. Those chains. The chaining means sort of like the action sequences. And I'm using the crow. I think it was the crow or the raven. That crow is able to hang out and watch the traffic
Yeah.
and put the nut in front of the traffic. The nut
Yeah.
gets cracked and then they ate it. Well,
Right.
you know, a sparrow shares the same environment with the crow,
Mm-hmm.
but the sparrow doesn't do what the crow does. So it's not in the crow's environment, and it's not in the crow's DNA. The crow is using a strategy, and I know our friend Ed was saying strategy, don't work.
They know the language of the human. They've
Right.
identified quite a bit of our language, not our words per se, but just the way we move, the way a bird's eye view, you can see the path through the mountain or something like that. And they know how to play. They can go sledding on rooftops with a garbage can top or something like that. They can
You can build a
identify
net.
how to manipulate the food situation. So
Yeah. So I'm just looking at that crow's ability to step out of time.
but what do they have to
To make
redistribute?
a plan.
They don't have any redistribution to like a penance they have to pay for their time on Earth. They're perhaps more developed in that sense, where they can proceed in a direction where they don't have to worry about.
I believe they're special, as all species are, and ours is extremely special in ways that no other species seems to be able to has manifested, because we can take tools to make other tools, and we can then combine those products and recombine them, and then we can create communities that are able to coordinate all of these different kinds of these different techniques and methods. And then we can we use tools, as I mentioned, to create art. We use a piano as a tool, so is a flute, so or a paintbrush with oil or acrylics. These are all produced by technology for a purpose, which is aesthetic pleasure. So I'm looking at what happens next. I believe we can, all of these different stages, from moving from a spear to a bow and arrow, to a flute, to a computer that we're using right now, to the quantum computer, which may be right around the corner. What is the relationship between that kind of the technology and the transformations and the history of technology and lucid dreaming?
John,
Those metanormal capacities that Michael, what's his name? Future.
Murphy.
Yeah.
Murphy.
Which are, daily events. We have synchronistic events. So what would happen if we were able to, and what is the relationship between the psychic and the techno? I think the relationship.
I have a question with what's next, and I get it, but maybe I'm coming from being in a position when I had my accident and traumatized, asking that question. And my first response was, I need to feel safe. I agree with you. We need to think about what's next, but let's have our feet on the ground, because I see what's happening on the street and in the world. The movement of from especially political it's not about being careful and chunking down and slow for what's next. It's about protecting and coming from a place of fear and being threatened. And the threat may be real. I do not want to deny any reality that there are dangerous things in this world, but the way we've conditioned ourselves to react from just that place. So it seems really important. It did to me. First, I need to take care of that feeling of threatenedness. What do I do with it? That's the first step of what's next, because then if I can just settle it down, acknowledge it, befriend it, I can take better next steps, like I have for the last 18 years. of owning my experience in the sense creating out of your words, really restructuring my own sense of agency out of a fucking big pile of shit. Sorry.
I need to feel safe, and restructuring a sense of agency.
Yes.
Okay. And Douglas, is there anything else we need to discuss before we move into this sort of? I wanted to ask you, Doug, if you're comfortable, since we already have. This is the way I'm thinking. I'm thinking out loud. Michael's already sort of offered us something like a well-formed outcome, or it's on the way to being a well-formed outcome. And I'm wondering if you could co-model with me, Doug, if you would feel comfortable using the clean language questions with me so that we could co-model together, our friend Michael. So the idea here is that we're all co-explorers.
Nice.
And that we are focusing on Michael. Is that okay with you, Doug? If we try
That's
this?
fine. Yeah,
Okay.
I would. I'll follow your lead, I suppose.
And do you have the clean language questions?
I can access them here in a second.
I think I posted the basic ones.
Yeah, you did, John. You did. I actually have my little Kindle so I can see them while I'm looking at here. I'm using two different technologies.
So the idea here is I'll ask 2 or 3, I'm going to use developing questions, which are the first, I think, 2 or 3 questions there. And then maybe you could ask 2 or 3 questions, clean questions.
Okay.
And then we can pause and just look at the emerging landscape.
Excellent.
Does that sound good to you?
Thank you, John. I really appreciate this.
And this is chunking down, chunking slow, creating connections. And I also want to just limit ourselves to developing questions, because all of the questions there's a logic to their use, and the time and the sequence and the relationship questions are useful if you've developed something. You're
a choreographer is what you're doing. You're a choreographer.
I like that, man. I'll go with that. I'm Diaghilev.
Yeah.
No, Diaghilev. And you can be Nijinsky if you want to, Michael.
I was thinking you were Bob Fosse, though.
Okay, Bob Fosse. Bob Fosse is even better. So this is and then we can look at the language patterns, and we can, as co-modelers, Doug and I can think out loud together, like what our strategy as modelers are.
Okay.
And Michael can do his own thing while we're talking about our strategy modeling.
I get to be the playful one, I guess.
Yeah. And I believe this could be a model for working with complex models.
Thank you.
This would be my big chunk, my desired outcome. Just like the pro wants to get that nut. You have that desired outcome, and now you have to come up with models to get it.
Okay, John, just a side note real quick, and I'm being persnickety.
Uh-huh.
The bird that landed on your head was what?
I think it wasn't a grackle, but it wasn't a crow. I haven't looked it up, but I think it's one of those. It's a songbird because it made a beautiful sound.
Okay.
But I think it looked like a grackle.
Okay.
But I don't have a language for that. I don't really know anything about birds or bird calls or anything like that. But it let out these beautiful tones.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. It was an ordinary bird. I don't think it was particularly, but I think that brings in questions and meta questions about the animal-human
yes
communiques
exactly
and the fields
I just want to be sure it wasn't the crow that was cracking a nut.
No. No.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. Let's move on.
Okay, so I'll start.
Okay.
And when I need to feel safe and restructuring a sense of agency. And Doug, I've just played it back. I need to feel safe and restructuring a sense of agency. And I want to develop just one word or a phrase. I'm going with safe, just to let Doug know.
Okay.
And I'm going to be developing that word.
Okay.
And then after 3 efforts, and I'm going to be looking for a location.
Okay.
Just to let Doug know.
Okay.
And Michael, and when I need to feel safe and restructuring a sense of agency, is there anything else about feel safe?
It has to happen right now.
It has to happen right now. And when it has to happen right now, and I need to feel safe, and it needs to happen right now, whereabouts feel safe right now?
The upper part of all through the upper part of my body.
All through the upper part of my body. And when all through the upper part of my body feels safe right now, then what happens?
The only image that comes to mind, and I forget who did it, is that picture of screaming but not being heard.
Picture of screaming but not being heard. And when a picture of screaming and not being heard, and I need to feel safe right now, all through the upper part of my body, what would you like to have happen now?
Shit. Okay, the image that comes to mind is I want to find a punching bag, not a human being, but a punching bag, and just throw out all this fucking energy.
Find a punching bag,
Not a human being.
not a human being, and throw out all of this energy. Is it okay if I pause?
Yeah.
And Douglas, you may have noticed that I didn't restrict myself to just developing questions. I looked for location. I also asked for a desired outcome because he gave me an image. He gets a picture of screaming, but of not being heard. Now I had a choice there. I could have said, okay, is there anything else about screaming and not being heard? But I also know I'm modeling his desired outcome, which is to feel safe. and to restructure a sense of agency. So I took that metaphor of screaming and not being heard, and then asked him what he wanted to have happen, which is an asking for something else. And then he talks about the punching bag. So we have the punching bag, and which is not human, and he wants to throw, and throws out all of this energy. So I guess we got a metaphor here that I think could work. We could develop further. Do you have any questions, Doug, or any intuitions, or go in a certain direction? We have a new friend here. Greetings, Katina.
Hello? You all hear me?
Hi.
Greetings.
How are you?
No, I didn't have anything to add, John, to that. So we'll let Katina get situated in here for a bit.
Sure. So I'm just going to. Hi, Katina. Are you at work today? Are you taking a break?
Let me see if I can hear.
Can you hear us? I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
You can? Oh, great.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, you can hear me.
Can you hear us?
I can't hear you, but you can hear me, right? Oh, good. Okay, now let me figure out how to hear you. I'm sorry I'm late.
No problem. I was late today too. We're all getting
I
started.
can only stay till like 1:30 or 1:45. Yeah, okay.
So I'll send her a message to let her know. I'll put her on mute for a minute while she figures things
All
out,
right.
so you can get going.
Oh, hello?
You able to hear us now?
You still hear me?
Yeah. But you can't hear us though.
Either the microphone works or the.
It may not be.
Shoot. Let me see. Let me take this out. Put it back in.
All right, John, I guess if you'd like to continue. Sorry, we had some technical difficulties there. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we got a metaphor. Find a punching bag, not human, and throw out all of this energy. And so my intuition is to develop that a little bit further and throw out and to get the desired, and to see what happens next. So I'm using time. I'm using a time question, before and after. And I believe this is a resource. So, and when I find a punching bag, not human, and throw, did you say throw out all of this energy? Throw off all of this energy?
Out.
And when you throw out all of this energy, then what happens?
Then there's not necessarily safety, but there's less intensity.
Not necessarily safety, but less intensity. And how much less intensity?
On a scale to 1 to 10, probably it ranges between dropping from 10 to 7 to maybe 5.
To 5. And it dropped from 10 to 7 to 5.
Mhm. Yeah.
And 10 being 1 being the most safe,
10 being, yeah, 1 being the most safe. I'm sorry.
10 being less safe.
Yeah.
So what needs to happen to get from 5 to 4?
Then it's not punching, it's moving. It's 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 like learning to swim.
Ah, it's like learning to swim. And Doug, could you maybe do a few developing questions around it's like learning to swim?
So, when learning to swim, whereabouts are you?
When learning to swim, whereabouts?
Swim.
Learning to swim.
I'm in my body, but not of my body.
Doug, you want to go for that? In my body, but not of my body? Is that what you said, Michael?
That's what I said.
So, in, but not of your body?
Yeah.
Can you locate the in? If you're
And good.
And-
And when in your body is the whereabouts in, when in your body. You see how you hear how hypnotic that language is? It bypasses the left brain right away. That's great.
Try it again, Doug.
So when in your body, but not of your body, whereabouts is the in of your body?
My solar plexus, my heart space.
And when solar plexus, heart space, what happens to feel safe?
Disappears.
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 And when disappears, and restructuring a sense of agency. Is there anything else about sense of agency?
Yes.
And yes. And what kind of yes is that yes when yes, a sense of agency?
That yes. That yes. The only image that comes to mind is being able, the image from Apollo of seeing Earth float in space.
Ah. Earth float in space.
Being held by something unhidden, something hidden from my comprehension.
And something hidden from my comprehension. And is that a good place to pause?
Sure.
So typically I would just say, could you could you make a representation
Yeah.
of all of that that makes sense to you? And I would go back and say, okay, it's like learning to swim and heart space and disappears and a sense of agency and yes and Apollo, Earth floating in something hidden from your comprehension. So I'm playing back his language and then inviting him to make a representation of that in a way that makes sense to him. It doesn't have to make sense to anybody but him. Because this is the process of working with clean language. And this isn't a conversation that I'm having with Michael. It's much different from a conversation where I say, oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean. You know, the other night I had this experience. You know? So I'm really inviting all of us to just entertain the possibility that we're going to uncover stuff and make it public, but it's going to be, I think, uncovering in a way that releases us from, you know, the counseling and the therapy that we've done, where it's sort of our dirty little secret, you know, just me and the therapist, and then we pay the therapist a lot of money in order to. So I believe that's the my interest is in getting these resources that we have to deal with the complexity of our lives out into a public sphere. I believe that's good for the public and it's good for the private. I believe there's a much more resilience can start happening. So anyway, that's my desired outcome. And I've sort of gotten it today, working with Michael and Doug. And Katina.
Yep. Katina said she could hear us in a message up. We'll check if she can still speak.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay.
Great.
Good. I'm sorry I'm late.
Oh, no problem. I was late too. So, you know, that happens. I got stuck in traffic. So we're really just getting started. And we were working with Michael and feeling safe and restructuring a sense of agency. And you came in right in the middle of that. So you got a little bit of what we're doing. And Doug and I were working together to co-model. And I was just sharing with Doug some of my process. So, of course, Doug can do with that what he will. But I think there's a usefulness in being able to share one's process as a modeler. So that then I believe we all get a little better, like, oh, this is how this person's using these questions in a certain way. And I can use them in a similar way or use them in a different way. But there's a logic. So we're not just flying totally by the seat of our pants. There are some principles here. But I would like to ask you, Katina, can you hear us, Katina? You just went.
Yes, I'm here.
Can I see your face though?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I had to blow my nose.
Oh, okay.
Didn't want you to see that.
Would you feel comfortable if you were the focus of our attention right now? Because I would like to ask you clean questions.
Sure, just give me a second, okay?
Hey, John, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Okay, I'm not, you know, if I was to follow through with that, you know, wanting it represented, I don't think I could draw it, but I could perform it with my body.
Okay.
Is that acceptable?
Sure.
Okay.
Would you like to do that now?
If you want to.
Okay. When Katina gets back.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Because at some point I wanted to get everyone's input on what we talked about in the thread about the series of repeated dreams where sequences of events happen little by little. And they are personal because they have to do with my dad recently. He's passed away a couple of years ago, but the dreams are just really interesting. And someone mentioned water when you were questioning Michael, and there was something about water. when you get a chance, can you just repeat that a little bit? Like, just talk a little bit more about where the water came in, because that comes into my dreams a lot as well.
I think he was talking about swimming.
Okay, yeah, that comes into my dream a lot. Okay.
And Michael just said that he can show it in movement.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than making a representation of it, he could move. And I was inviting Michael, if you'd like to show us, Michael, the movement, and if it makes sense to you, if that's the best way to make sense, please.
Okay, so this would be from the starting point. Okay. Jellyfish.
That's so interesting, Michael, because I can't swim like in real life, but in my dream, I could swim. And part of the repetition of this dream is me driving on a bridge, going around a curve too fast and falling off the bridge. And of course, I'm thinking in my car, I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to die because I can't swim. But for several nights in a row, when I fall off the bridge, I wake up right before I hit the water. And then the sequence would continue where just recently I was driving on the bridge, going around a sharp curve, and I'm like, oh, this is that dream where I fall off the bridge and wake up before I die. Well, my dad was in the car with me, and he says, and he's like, he's panicking. He said, Katina, we're going to die. And I said, no, Dad, this is a dream I have all the time. As soon as we hit the water, I'm going to wake up. So don't worry. But this time we hit the water, and I'm like, and I didn't wake up. And I remember like crashing into the water, and those swimming movements you were doing just now, at the very end, I could relate to that, because when I hit the water, I went underwater. So it started off with this, because I remember the water was brown kind of, but dark, but it was nighttime. And I remember going under the water like this, and I remember my dad was with me, and he was tugging. He can't swim either. So then I came up, and I wasn't swimming so much as the tide of the water was sort of swimming me. And I was grabbing onto him. I said, don't worry, Dad, we're gonna make it. But it wasn't swimming, it was like the water was swimming and carrying me along, in it. And then right when I reached some land, I said, look, Dad, there's some land over here. We're gonna be okay. Then I woke up. Can you swim? You can swim, right?
I'm an average swimmer. I'm an average swimmer. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's what was interesting to me, what you said about the swimming in the water, because I could feel the water, filling up in my nostrils, and then right that moment when you came up, it was like the water was carrying me. It was no effort of my own. It was like, so that was kind of interesting.
It is.
Thanks for showing it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciated that.
And
I'm sorry, John, you wanted to ask me some
for this and this dream and your dad and your dad saying we're going to get killed, and going into the water and brown water.
He said we're going to die.
You were going to die.
Yeah.
And water carrying me along and reach land. And for this, and with all of that, for this session to be really useful for you, Katina.
It already is.
What would you like to have happen now?
In that dream?
In this session?
Oh, in this session, well, it's already happened. I just wanted to tell you all about the dream and get some feedback. And I wanted to see if anyone could relate to the dream, and that has happened.
And anyone relate to this? And okay, I think we could have a conversation about that. And I'm open to that. But I'm also interested in and learn what have you learned something about this dream and sharing it in this public space about being with your dad in this dream. And this, I believe you said, was a recurring dream. Is there anything you've learned
Yes.
from sharing this dream?
Mhm. The key is, you said recurring, and then the issue with the water. Sometimes I wonder if water is like almost if it's some type of a cosmic gateway in our dreams, because water usually shows up in dreams that are my dreams that are most vivid and memorable. And also water for me always makes me feel like my life is in danger when it comes to water. But when I heard Michael talking about being in the water and then the struggling part when he sort of mimicked the movements and there was a point where he was almost like throwing punches, like struggling.
I was.
Yeah, I could relate to that because when I hit the water, there was a struggle but I wasn't struggling against the water. I was struggling against the idea that I was going to die, and so then when the water started carrying me, it was like, oh, I'm not going to die. And then I'm also thinking, wait, why am I still dreaming? I was supposed to wake up by now, And so, the fact that the water in the dream, water being associated with struggle or some kind of fear for me, and then the fact that and the fact that the dream recurs and a little bit more is revealed each time. Because I've been on that damn bridge so many times, and the moment when I turn faster on the curve and oh man, there's a part in the dream when the car falls off the bridge, it's like I can feel myself in the car in midair, and I can feel myself falling, and thinking. And of course, the first time I had that dream, I was terrified because I forgot I was dreaming. But then after it happened so many times, it almost became like when you want to ride a roller coaster again. It scares you the first time, but okay, this is going to happen again. So I've learned a lot just from the couple minutes I've been here.
And I wonder if water is a cosmic gateway, and water, my life in danger and struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And recurring dream, and fast turn, and midair. And water carrying me along and reach land. And Dad says, we're going to die?
Yeah.
And with all of that, can you make a representation of that in a way that makes sense to you? A sketch or a drawing or a doodle?
Yeah, I probably could. It would probably be a picture of like waves, me seeing like land, shore, and then waves. And what's in particular, because what made me sort of, when my dad said we're going to die, that's what sort of made me transition from surrendering to the fact that I was going to die to, no, we're not. No, we got to survive this. And I remember putting my arm, like linking my arm around his shoulder or his neck or something, so that as the water was pulling me along and keeping me afloat, I could bring him with me. And I remember reassuring him, no, Dad, we're not going to die. There's something, there's some land or something we're going towards. So it would probably be a picture of something like that, like me with my arm around my dad's shoulder or his neck, and then waves around, those brown waves, and then lighter brown land, like sand or shore or something. So yeah, I could probably draw a sketch of it.
And your arms around your dad.
Yeah, one of them, because one of them is sort of like on top of the water being carried, and the other one is latched around him. But the thing is, my dad's already dead. I mean, that's what's so weird about it. And it wasn't until he said we're going to die that I thought, oh man, no, we got to survive this, because I don't want my dad to be afraid of dying. Yeah, he's already dead. So.
And my dad is already dead.
Yeah.
we are survivors, and water is a cosmic gateway. I wonder. And is this a good time to pause?
Sure.
And I just wanted to talk to my co-developers here. It's getting a little bright in here. Have to put the curtain. So if you have a pencil and a paper, and you could make a little drawing while I talk to my colleagues here. And this, I believe, is an opportunity for me to reflect a little bit on what Katina has offered to our group. And this is not something that I would directly say to Katina as an interpreter of her dream, because I'm not interested in necessarily doing that. But this is an experiment, a social experiment, about how we can work with this kind of intimate material in a way that as a modeler, my intention is to stay in rapport with her dream. And so I want to ask clean questions so that the dream can come forward in her experience, and that she can model herself through the questions that I ask. So we're, in a sense, I'm co-modeling with her, but also with the group, because you guys are part of the intelligence here. We're all members of this field that we all have access to. So I'm just sharing out loud how this is, it's kind of messy. I mean, I'm not saying everything is clear, clean, pristine, step by step is obvious. It's not. And especially when we're not working like in a one-to-one in a conference room, we're working in a group. And Michael has just shown us, he's come up with a couple of metaphors. He's made movements that make concrete for him, make sense for him, his experience of that metaphor. So he somatized that metaphor for us. Katina has dived right in, and now she's developing her metaphorical landscape through this dream that she shared with us. And I'm doing my best to find the right rhythm so that we can all make the most of our time together today. And I know that Katina mentioned having to leave at 1:30, so I want to honor her time frame here. Okay, that's okay. I couldn't hear you, but that's okay. You can work a little longer than that?
Yeah, I can stay till about 1:45.
Okay, cool. And Doug, I guess I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you, Doug, but is there something that you would like to work on, a dream or a reflection or a model or something that you would like to develop? I know you mentioned doing a Gidley cafe in a couple of weeks. So I was curious about if there's anything you would, any kind of support you need to make that happen, or anything else you want to.
Just in this conversation alone, I find myself, it seems like clean language, the process works best. At least for me, I'm having trouble. I'm not a good learner when it comes to the process we're doing here. I can't be an exemplary student or something like that. I find myself wanting to, I've got drawings of Michael's energy fist into a punching bag of, that's my own drawing, but to actually make use of the clean language, I find myself, yeah, I'll have to work on that. I mentioned I worked on my son a few times, and that process is a bit different because he's 4, so he's not going to receive the questions the same way. So it would be more wordy, a little bit more of a conversation with him, And I find
Sure.
myself with Katina, I wanted to have a conversation about this dream and jump into the recurring kind of the education that she's gotten from the recurrence of the dream and educating her father, saying, well, no, this is not a time that we're going to die. So I found myself wanting to ask, how did he react, and questions that don't relate to the clean language. But
Right, and I think at the end of our session today, because she has like 15 minutes, we could do an open frame. And I think everything that you were just describing would be like if we had a template here, it would be like, that would be great for an open frame after we've had some experience.
right.
We've had something experiential happen.
I
Then we
guess
can
the
reflect
thing,
on our experience together. And this isn't, this
I
is
have
such
to add
okay.
Was the quote that I threw out yesterday about the jellyfish from the Lathe of Heaven book. I think Michael and John were here, but that's really standing out as a metaphor for well, the two descriptions here from Katina and Michael. But if you don't mind, I'll read that and we can proceed from there. See what happens.
I just want to add something real quick. I found it interesting that in listening to from the Gregory and Marco and Heather. Is it Heather?
Hester.
Yeah.
She used some. I was shocked that she brought in the jellyfish. It was like, okay, this is really interesting.
Okay, I have a request, because
Okay.
I had a dream last night. And you know, this is not a clean language training. It takes years to become really facile at this. I've been working on it for 10 years, and you know, I still feel like a beginner. But I think, and so I'm not offering this as a training, but I'm offering this just as an opportunity to do something different from what we already know how to do.
Right.
And it's also the best way I have of exploring my own process. And I use this as a writer all the time. And I use it very judiciously in conversations. And then I can, in certain instances, as we've been doing today, use it in a kind of ritual way. I want to move beyond chats and conversations and move into the unknown,
Okay.
that unknown country, and then go back to what we know and make connections. And I think and then we'll have different kinds of conversations. I think that we'll have much more depth and span. I had a dream last night. I believe this is a social dream. And this is an experiment. And if you feel comfortable, if you don't feel comfortable, that's fine. But I think Michael has a facility to this already, and I think Doug has a latent facility for using these clean questions. But I had this dream, and I'm with my mother, and she is telling me that she thinks I'm beautiful. And I get kind of angry with her. And I said, I'm 65 years old, and this is the first time you've ever told me I was beautiful. And I feel like tearful. And I look into a mirror, and I saw, and I said, I am so sick and tired of living a life that is about me, me, me. And I looked into this mirror, and it wasn't an image of myself. It was an image of a woman. She was a very beautiful woman. So if you could just ask me a few developing questions out of any keywords there, just find a word or a phrase, go for it. Thank you.
And when there is anger with your mom, what else about that anger is?
Is there anything else about that anger? Yeah.
And when there's anger, is there anything else about that?
I think there's a long history. It's about a history of feeling ignored and of not being recognized. Not only just by my mother, but others as well, but especially my mother. Many other people have recognized me in ways that I've liked being recognized. But my mother is not one of them. So I think that's the anger in the dream. And it's an anger at a history of neglect and abuse and indifference.
And when being ignored and not recognized, that not being recognized or ignored is like what?
Well, it's like Marco. Well, it's not exactly the same, but I think I feel a relationship between this event and looking into a mirror and being tired of narcissism and the me syndrome, and seeing not my own reflection, but a woman with beautiful hair. I recall Marco in a conversation yesterday discussing an experience of putting his mother's photograph on Twitter and looking into her photo, trying to do a profile on Twitter and looking at her photo and seeing this beautiful woman there who was himself.
Mm-hmm.
That beautiful woman, his mother, in the photo was himself. And he felt something in his back. I think he said it was a spear in the mid back in the heart, behind the heart, in his spine. He felt a sensation. And he rejected that, putting his mother's photo into the system on Twitter. He decided not to go in that direction. So to me, I felt some of this was in this experience with my mother, and looking in the mirror and seeing a beautiful woman and feeling this me being repetitive, saying that 3 times, and getting really tired of it.
Okay, so, and when seeing not my own reflection, but a woman, what happens just before seeing not my own reflection, but a woman?
Great. That was very puzzling to me after the dream was over and I woke up and reflected on it. But while it was happening in the dream, it didn't seem odd at all. It just seemed like, okay, I'm not there. It's a beautiful woman. But I just took it as sort of okay. But I was aware of these different levels. It wasn't what I would call a lucid dream, but maybe a pre-lucid dream. Sometimes odd things like quirky things like that can sometimes trigger lucidity. It did not trigger lucidity while in the dream, but I think now as I'm putting this into a public space and sharing it, I believe there's something that could be reflected upon there.
Okay, so aware of different levels. What needs to happen for aware of different levels?
What needs to happen for
Of being aware of the different levels? What needs to happen?
Well, sort of like what's happening right now. it's like really slowing down and chunking down and doing a kind of micro perceptual analysis of this. And I'm sort of meta commenting on the process and your questions and the questions that you've come up with assist me in doing that. And
Okay.
Doug, you want to try a question? You don't have to. You don't want to, Doug. But, or do you have another question, Michael?
Well, if Doug wants to, that I'll pass the baton to him. I had one more question, but
Okay, go for it. I don't want to
okay. I just want to and slowing down and chunking down. What would slowing down and chunking down like to happen?
like to have happen. What would
Like
slowing?
to have happen? Yeah, you're right.
What would chunking down and slowing down like to have happen? Well, I feel like there's this sort of, I have to somatize this, okay?
Nice. Beautiful. That's beautiful. Is this a good time to pause, John?
Thank you.
I guess Katina had to leave.
Oh, did Katina have to leave? Okay.
Yeah, I guess Katina had to leave.
And maybe she lost her connection. And maybe she'll be back.
Yeah.
So thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. That was good practice for me, John.
That was great.
So yeah, I don't necessarily want to add on to the process there. You've declared you wish to stop there.
Well,
you formed a pretty decent image, but so at this point we would ask you to actually make a drawing of this.
Yeah, that's good.
So,
That's good.
And
let's see it. Let's bring it
yeah.
up.
Yeah, I believe I summatized that because Michael summatized his, I can summatize it.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised that we were able to use the space for that purpose. There are lots of processes using clean space, along with clean language, that are extremely powerful. So you can use you can represent it in any way that makes a sense to the person. So, and Douglas, are you,
Where did he go?
he disappeared into the void too?
I think he can hear us.
There he goes. There he goes.
Oh, sorry. Whenever I receive a phone call,
I know.
sometimes my phone blocks. I have to block it.
We're at 1:34, so maybe we can go another 20 minutes, half an hour. Is that okay with you guys?
Yeah. Either way,
Okay.
whatever works.
If Doug, I would like to make Doug a focus for me and Michael. If Doug is up for that, something that you would like to work on, Doug, whatever that is.
Right. I'm feeling artistic right now, though not necessarily something to share to the public or anything like that. But I was just browsing this library and was guided to a different area that I typically don't go to. But I checked out, or at least grabbed a few books about glass blowing. It was right next to like intricate rug and carpet designs that reminded me of tapestry work that we've been focusing on weaving here. That was a metaphor from yesterday. And in the process, I found two books that I really enjoyed a few years ago. One's called The Art of Looking Sideways. It's just a
Wow.
collection of pages that kind of tie in with the other pages. It's nothing, it has some coherence, but it's, you can flip to anywhere in the book and It's very interesting. Another one was by a graphic novelist, Craig Thompson, called Habibi. But he has quite a few very interesting designs from, here's just one picture, but he utilizes the Arabic language into his artwork, and it becomes part of the drawing on some pages. So this one's depicting, that might mean Habibi there, which is love, and it's depicting it within the waves. It's another one I can just turn to a few pages, and the artistry is very intricate, interesting. That's just the table of contents there. So very good visuals.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
I'm in a visual mode today, is perhaps what I'm saying. Not just into grabbing at whatever my eyes see, but really developing that. Yeah.
And
So, yeah, I'll proceed from there.
and I'm just going with this, okay? We'll see what happens. And when artistic, is there anything else about artistic?
Colors.
What kind of colors?
I only brought one today. This was a gift a few years ago. They're nothing too fancy, but they're very, very fine point tipped, colorful pins. This one's kind of a brownish red, perhaps a ochre color.
And artistic and colors and ochre and brown. And when artistic and colors and ochre and brown, whereabouts artistic? Does artistic have a size or a shape?
This is interesting that it's not a mental projection, but it's an actual, not on my screen now, but I was browsing, she calls herself Ariadne and Maya, but she did the something that was recently published on the metapsychosis page. I'm not good at Spanish, but Cocina de kitchen, something about constellations in the kitchen. When she wrote a poem, and it has now been published, but it has all these life and death, the colors of kind of sorrow in the butternut squash, performing some sort of ritual with the seasons.
And colors of sorrow and butternut squash and Ariadne and metapsychosis and constellation and ritual. And then what happens to artistic?
It's a smattering of, or a splattering of paint on the page. Each word can become another idea. Each little splatter is something that was unexpected, but there's a connection to the root of the.
And a splattering and a connection
Of the creation. There's
of the creation.
connection of the creation within itself, perhaps.
And a splattering of paint on a page and connection. And is there anything else about connection?
That's where the paint, when it hardens, it can become the threads. It can become the material that will be woven So that,
And when paint hardens, it becomes the thread that when it hardens,
right. Yeah. The paint is thick enough and firm enough that it actually physically can be peeled off and be woven.
and physically peeled off and be woven. And when physically peeled off and woven, then what happens?
That's when the weaving begins. So that's
And
another
that's-
a project from another project, a creation from another creation.
And that's when the weaving begins. And is it okay if I pass it on to you, Michael? Is there anything you want to develop in that?
No, I can't think of anything. You've done too good a job, John. I was actually going right alongside of you.
Okay. So, would this be a good time to pause?
Do you have any other questions?
I could come up with a lot of questions. More questions. You started out with artistic, but you also qualified that. And it wasn't something you necessarily wanted to make public. But then you proceeded to develop it with a few questions. And you talked about the thread, that the paint, you could see how the metaphor was starting to change, because it was a splatter of paint on a page, and there was something to do with words, and then it becomes a connection. Hi, Katina, welcome back.
Hi, I'm sorry. I changed rooms and lost and my computer like crashed.
Okay, well,
So-
I will be right with you in just a second.
Sure, of course. Go ahead. Yeah.
And then there was the connection, and the paint, when hardens, becomes a thread. And he somatized that. He showed us where the thread was. It was in his fist. And then it becomes something that's weaving. And he mentioned already yesterday the metaphor that came up in the conversation of weaving. And he also mentioned tapestry. So we went on this little mini journey from the library and the different books that he was picking up and exploring, to colors, and to Ariadne, and to constellations, and the colors of sorrow, the butternut squash. So I'm just letting all of you guys know that when you're working with someone with a rich inner landscape, as with Doug, it's not easy. You think someone with a complex, rich inner landscape makes things easier for you? It doesn't. And also sometimes people just say, I don't know. And sometimes they're easier to work with in a way, because you say, oh, well, and when I don't know, is there anything else about I don't know? And then they'll start to. So I'm just like saying, my metaphor here is, how do I enter into the weave? And I think I use that metaphor a lot, of the client's landscape. How do I stay in rapport with the symbols that are emerging in that landscape? And what is the logic that's operating? So it's a lot going on. And I'm here learning a lot, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to sort of create like my metaphor here is like a rehearsal space. It's also kind of like a laboratory too.
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't want to limit us at all just to clean language. There may be other methods. Oh, you got something you wanted to explore?
That's
Wow.
image. It's just lines, squiggly lines going, and they're going in a certain direction. So it's called weaving paints or weaving waves.
Wow.
There was a drawing. I took notes a while ago, kind of like summaries that Katina does with Aurobindo. Maybe 10 years ago, I had a journal that I had nice colorful pens that I just happened to get for maybe a gift or at an art store. And that always inspires me to have better detailed notes with different colors, at least on paper. I've been trying to learn how to type better and take notes, but that's a hit or miss project for me. So, but I'm just reminded of that notebook, so I'm going to go and find it tonight. Maybe I'll show it another time, but it was my attempt to explain Aurobindo to my wife, Rain. We were living separately for 2 years as she was in the Philippines waiting to come over here. So this was a notebook I would send back and forth to her. And at one point we were talking Aurobindo, and I'm surprised she stuck around with me at that point. But.
That's so silly.
Can I see the drawing again? Is there, and what do you want to attracted to in that weave? What have you called it? The weaving?
Right, and I didn't have multiple colors, so I had my brownish red pen, and then I had a black pen. So
and weaving waves. Weaving waves. When weaving waves, what are you most attracted to in weaving waves?
The process is always nice. There's no end product, I guess. Nor is there much of a starting point. Or there is a starting point, but it kind of becomes part of the layers. So.
And there is a starting point, and it becomes part of the waves. Ooh, that sun is so bright. Oh. Sorry, guys. I have to change the lighting in my room. It says late in the afternoons. Sometimes the sun is too bright. I can't even see. Okay. So Katina.
I'm going to just briefly mention that I will have to leave in maybe 5 minutes. So I'm going to attempt to switch the host to you, John, which just simply means when you log out, maybe the recording will stop. But that way, when I log out, the recording will continue.
Okay. Maybe you could stay, if you can't.
That's all I wanted to say.
If you I just wanted to check in with Katina and then maybe do a little wrap up.
I can stay for a little bit longer. I'm just kind of moonlighting between screens. I already started work, but
did you have
preliminary stuff.
Did you get a chance to represent that in any way?
Oh, you mean the picture? Yeah, I drew a sketch of it.
Oh, I'd love to see it. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, and at some point, when you were talking about the personal aspects of our dreams, I do want to talk to you at some point about because I've had other dreams about him as well. That had to do with his alcoholism, and so yeah, that's something that I wanted to explore like in a later session. But I don't know if you can see it or not. It's like a pencil sketch. Let me see. How do I make this so that we just
Can you hold it up again? Hold it up.
Let me take it out of gallery view. Okay. Like that?
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah, I can hold it steady. Oh, I see it. It looks like, okay.
Okay, so this is, so up here, this is like the bridge. Wait, I'm sorry. Oh, it's mirrored. Okay.
Yeah, I see it.
Up here's the bridge, right? That
Right.
we fell off of, and then that's the car crashing into the water, stars. And then it's my dad right here, and that's the arm. These are all the waves, the car's going under. And then these are like, that's like the land or, that the water sort of carrying us towards. Yeah, so that's pretty much, the arm is so big because that's what I remember, like anchoring him, and that's just like the shoe or something. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but.
And what are you most drawn to in your drawing?
Well, of course, survival, like, this up here. Because I didn't know that was there because I never fell off the bridge before in the other, in the previous dreams. But in this one, so I didn't, I didn't know what, because once I hit the water, I woke up. So I guess this was sort of like a continuation, so this is what, I didn't know that was there. And then the bridge behind me that I fell off of in the car, that I've seen that so many times, and that's what I'm drawn to the most.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us today. And
thank you.
Public these inner spaces with us, because I think all of us. I wonder if maybe Doug had to leave. He said he was going to pass on the host to me. But anyway, so we have a few minutes. Maybe we could wrap up and just do a little open frame. And I would just invite you, if there's anything you learned today, what that could be that you learned today that you would like to share. And maybe we could then discuss next time. I think we have a date on Wednesday at the same time.
It's next Wednesday, right? At 12? 12 my time. Okay, right.
But for me, I learned that because I was late today, as were you, Katina. So this happened. So I feel like it was a little more turbulent than I prefer. But I also realized that I created a lot of that because I was late. And oh, here's Mr. Doug. Doug, are you there?
He's muted.
I'm back now, I think.
Thank you for rejoining us. Yes, we were going to wrap up, and I was just going to maybe do a little open frame around learn today. Anything. And I was just saying how it was a little choppy. It was a little turbulent for me. I was late today, and I wasn't quite as smooth as I wanted it to be. However, that's fine because I still learned something. Because I believe I was able to stay in rapport with landscapes that were emerging in our place. And so I'm really interested in that interplay between different landscapes. And can we handle this? Do we have the cultural capacity to handle this kind of complexity in an online forum like this? If we were in a conference room together and we had a whole day, I'm sure we could go very deep, in many different directions. But we're all very constrained by the circumstances we're in, and can we learn something from each other? I believe we can. I think we can do this better. So thank you for this opportunity. So please, whoever feels called upon to speak next, I'd love to hear you.
I learned a lot. I'm sorry, I just interrupted you, Michael. Sorry. I'm going to keep interrupting you. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so I learned about the water, the significance of water in these dreams, and I'm going to start thinking more about how to associate that with themes. Like with Michael, when you're talking about the struggling in the water, and then I also have to give more thought to about my dad and what maybe sometimes I feel like he's trying to communicate something to me, even though I don't necessarily believe in people communicating from the dead and whatever. I mean, I think that there's very specific circumstances that allow that. but I need to start thinking about that more, and I'm going to continue sketching pictures because I have other pictures as well that I've drawn of my dreams with him in it. So I'm going to continue sketching those pictures and probably bring them with me. But it was good to see that there was a connection with what Michael, with what Michael was saying with the, his struggle in the water. And it's, wow, that was, and I wonder if it'd be interesting to find out if it had anything to do with, remember when you sent me the picture of the jellyfish, Michael, and I contacted you and said, meet me at the surface of the water, and then I ended up having this dream somewhat related to yours in a way. And I just wonder if that kind of influenced it in some sense. So yeah, I think this was really productive.
Thank you. And please feel free to post any drawings on all of us. That would be great. We could keep a sort of gallery of interior spaces that we're sharing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to share that you came in at that part of the water, but it begins on land. It begins with not feeling safe. I had an accident many years ago, and I had to recover from trauma, and safety becomes important, and that begins on the land. And how I had to move from being contracted around the need for safety, and how that tightness causes me to feel intense hypervigilance, and the punching bag was my way of punching my way out, and the swimming of after being out in water, a different element of my healing process.
Right.
And taking it to the it was amazing. John's questions actually touched into my own unconscious path that I've taken for the last 18 years, that I've never languaged that way. But his questions and this timing of it helped me feel an open space that my body's been taught. I know now, I trust my body's been telling me, talking to me in different, and I think there's general symbols, but it's just like I personalize the symbols for myself. And water has always been important to me because to me it serves a place for nourishment, healing. It's a big element from my understanding of the Bible. It's a big element in terms of Taoism, and being able to move to the next level of not needing to feel safe and feel the earth floating in space is like the jellyfish floating in the ocean.
Right. Yeah.
And what I learned from this process is it's deeply trusting my own process. John gave me that by his way of helping me come to that place of trusting my process. And it's been an ongoing thing I think this is the fourth time of moving. It's always been safe with Doug and Doug, but of me feeling safe with my own process. That's what I've learned. And thank you, John, and thank you, Doug, for holding the space, even if it's cyberspace.
Thank you. Doug?
Yeah.
Last but not least.
I don't have much to say. I appreciate it.
It
always goes too short. Not that I'm running off now. I had to take care of something, but this could continue on for 4 or 5 hours, and perhaps we can have a session like that one time. I don't know if we could sit in a chair the whole time. We'd have to dance and do things, but we're approaching some sort of depth in these conversations. So.
I would really, I'd be curious to know if there's a relationship between the splattering of paint on the page and the connection and the paint when it hardens and it becomes a thread and weave. If there's a relationship between all of that and Jennifer Gidley and post-formal education. That would be the direction that I'm most curious about in Doug's process. I'm just making that explicit. What happens next? I'm really curious. But perhaps we'll have some dreams between now and the next time we meet. And, the dream, Katina's dream about her dad, that recurring dream about the water and rescuing him and coming to the land, and Michael's punching bag, which turns into that ocean image. And I think I had this one. Didn't I have this one? Something like this?
Yeah.
I'm somatizing my dream image.
I'm going to start paying more attention to the actions and my actions and activity in my dreams, also movements. I never really focused on that part before, but I'm going to start looking at that more.
Well, that's only happened today because Michael's spontaneously started to somatize, and I started to somatize too.
Yeah.
And I believe that's a very interesting direction to go in. Those are other cultural capacities we have that we can develop. So I believe there's also between my gestures, his gestures, and your drawing, and Doug's riffing on his library books. there may be, these are all surface structures of
Yeah.
a deeper structure
Right.
that we all have access to. And because we made it public, I think we have much more facility
Right.
at accessing these, what would you call them? These interstices. There's some liminal zones.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope we do more of it and do it better. And I think this is aesthetically a very enjoyable way of hanging out and
Yeah, it
learning
is.
about each other at different levels.
Yep, I agree.
I very much appreciate it. Quick question. So are we going to be able to meet next week, or do we have to wait 2 weeks? I just want to be sure I understand.
I'm open that it's up to you guys. However frequently or infrequently you want to meet, it's okay with me.
I think next Wednesday is an open frame, as in no other book club.
Yeah, I did.
some
Yeah,
sort of-
yeah. So
If this is it good for you guys, the same time?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. If possible, I would like to, as much as possible, maybe week to week. But I know that there's
Yeah.
exceptions. And also, I guess this is a technical question to Doug. Maybe in a day this will post, because I need to review this for myself.
Right.
It's
Well,
usually the day after, isn't it?
I typically put it up the next morning.
Okay, that's all. I just want to get a ballpark. That's all, Doug.
That's my goal. I don't have internet service at my home, so once I work, I
Okay.
cannot download anything or upload. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'll get it
Yeah.
as soon as I can tomorrow.
So
Okay, I
we
appreciate
can
it.
review the video and we can post our pictures, and we can also add comments or new
Okay.
changes come up. We can post those, and that can
Okay.
all be grist for the mill. Okay?
Okay, that's
So
great.
aiming to the same time next Wednesday then.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So,
I'll see you around campus, everybody.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
Cortina, are you going to come back next week?
Yeah, I am. I have it on my calendar. Yep.
Excellent.
At 12 o'clock.
That'd be nice.
Thank
Thank
you.
you again.
Thank you.
This is great.
Bye-bye.
All right,
Bye-bye,
see you later.
everybody. Take
Bye-bye.
care.